correct name, the name on Mr. Etomi's profile. It's written at showing my name at the moment. So could you edit that, please? Will you be able to do that? Rex, can you confirm that you can do that, please? Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Nigerian Bar Association section on Business Law Weekly. Today is our 13th edition of the Business Law Weekly, and we cover a variety of topics around business law. And today we are having a discussion with the distinguished Mr. George Etomi. And we're going to be talking about law. We're going to be talking about law. We're going to be talking about the SBL, and we're going to be talking about the Nigerian business environment. So it's my responsibility to chaperone the discussions today. And I will just, sort of guide Mr. Etomi in, the questions that we have. We expect this to be an interactive session, so please drop your comments into the Q&A, your questions rather, into the Q&A box as early as possible. And I will be taking some of those questions as the session goes on. So, Mr. Etomi, let me welcome you. Thank you very much for joining us at the 13th BLW.
Thank you, Dave. It's always my pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, I have to say that it's very easy to introduce you because all I have to say is Mr. George Etomi. I think everything else speaks for itself. But it's my responsibility to mention that you are the founding partner of George Etomi and Partners, and also the founding chairman of the section on business law. And as part of our discussions today, we're going to talk about both George Etomi and Partners and section on business law. But I really want to start talking about your work as a corporate/transactions lawyer. I would say for some people, they consider it an unusual route. I think things are beginning to change, but I've had a lot of questions these days about who are these transaction lawyers? How would you be a lawyer and you don't go to court? And this is coming from lawyers as well, and young lawyers. So perhaps let's start with your journey. How did you move from being a lecturer into practicing in the firm and then being a transactions lawyer?
Thank you, Dewey. Let me start by commending the SBL for this initiative. The SBL, since its founding, has been the harbinger of what I might call good news in the area of corporate law practice. And I congratulate you. You have stepped into shoes that have been worn by other eminent transactional lawyers, and I wish you the best. It's not easy, but I wish you the absolute best. Now, speaking directly to the question you asked, when I left to do my master's at the London School of Economics, this was in 1978. 1978. Can you imagine? I'm even trying to remember myself. And I finished in 1979 and returned. My first option was to go teach, because at that time, the attraction outside of litigation was the classroom. So I actually took up a position at the University of Lagos, but I never taught for one day in the end, because the day I was to start my classes, I saw my very good friend, Udoma, who was rounding up a 3-month stint. And I just saw out of my door, there was someone walking past, and I recognized him. I said, Udoma, what are you doing? And he said, oh, George, what are you doing here? I said, well, I came to teach. He said, well, he had been there for like 3 months. It didn't sort of gel for him and all. And I said, oh, so what are the other options? And then he said, well, he was going into corporate practice in-house with what was then Chase Bank in Nigeria. And I said, so what other options exist? And he said, oh, there's this place, Chris Ukumanjanko. He had interned there. And then he gave me the address. So I went, and the rest, they say, is history. And that's how my path with Chief Chris Okubanjo, that's how our paths crossed. And it's to him I always give the credit. Of course, the first credit goes to God Almighty, but to him for being the one positioned at that time to become not just my employer, but my mentor, and actually played a father figure role in my life. If you consider that I lost my father at, I think, about age 16. So it was an eye-opener for me, because I've heard about corporate law practice, but I'd never seen it in Nigeria. Because prior to that time, I worked with the usual summer vacation as a law student. Then as in law school, we did our stuff. I did mine at Chief Awolo's chambers. But at that time, the person I worked with was my brother-in-law, Mr. Abayomi Shubasa, senior advocate, who was a thoroughgoing litigator. So that, you could say, was my trajectory into practice. So meeting Chief Okubanjo, who sort of veered off the course of what his other peers at the time were doing, which was litigation practice, to corporate law practice, I thought was very interesting. Because at that time, Nigeria had started implementing one of the most major events in its corporate life, which was the indigenization of businesses in Nigeria. And prior to that time, most of the corporate work was done by foreign law firms or foreigners that were at the time based in Nigeria. If you remember Angus Ferguson and all these other guys who were here at the time. So it was very interesting finding somebody like Chief Okubanjo, who not only bit the bullet, but really became what I might call the progenitor of modern corporate law practice. So straight up, in his characteristic style, which I've adopted, he just pushed us into the deep end of matters. He was there to guide us, but critically, he exposed us to the best of his clients at the time. And what that did for us was that it instantly built confidence in us. And now for many young lawyers today who are in the transaction space, you know that confidence is so key when you are giving advice, when you're in negotiations. Because if you go into a negotiation totally unsure, looking uncertain, you may not breathe confidence in whoever the investor is going to be. And I found that very interesting. I mean, to minute details like George, and at that time, by the way, I brought Udoma into the firm, because 3 months after I started, I went back to Udoma and said, look, why would you pass up such a good opportunity? So I brought him back to the firm. So we were there together. So Udoma and I were there. And straight up, I mean, Chief would tell us things like, wherever you go, you must project the dignity of corporate law practice, from the way you conduct yourself, the way you travel, be punctual to meetings, be prepared, get your facts, get your figures, get everything right. I mean, there could never have been a better mentor to take us through what at that time was a very novel area of practice for Nigerians. So it's not much of a surprise that quite a lot of the people I call the foundation members of the second generation of corporate law practitioners were actually from Chris Ogumanja and Co. I think about people like, of course, I'm not going too far, your firm. I'm not going too far. Senator Ugujen was one of, I mean, and the good thing about that was that everybody became a role model for everybody else. Until this day, he's one of the ones I admire the most in the way he conducts himself. You can see that dignity, that presence, that knowledge that just simply comes out of the confidence you have. And if we go a step later to the succeeding generations, then you talk about the Asway, Igodalos who were there, Bode Johnson, and all of that people. So when I eventually had to leave, when I left, I just had one thing in mind, to set up a practice that answered to international best standards. And really what that simply entails is that you first of all understand that in the kind of law that we practice, transactional law, commercial law, there are no favors. There are the clients who brief you, one, have options. Two, they're putting their money at risk. Three, they are not sentimental about it. So it is not your face, it is not your name in terms of your background. It is just what you have to offer in terms of your knowledge and in terms of your integrity. And what would make all that work for you then as a young practitioner? It was to invest in the necessary tools. And it's interesting to know that just before we left Chris Ogumanja, came the advent of the word processor, with the forerunner to what we all now take for granted, the word processor. And I remember Udoma and I went to Chief to let him know that there was this new technology that enabled us correct mistakes or upgrade documents without necessarily having to type voluminous documents all over, because the highest paying workers at the time were your typists, your secretaries who could type and type very fast. And so they bluffed many of us lawyers because you had to be friends with them if you are going to get your work done in good time. And then this technology. And I still remember it was the Wang system. They were based in Ilupetu at the time. So Dom and I arranged for a demo in our conference office. Those machines were huge. They filled up one end of the conference room, but the demo was amazing. So amazing that one of the senior lawyers, I'm not going to say his name, at the time, after we left, he went back to Chief. Chief, you have to watch out for these young boys. Can you see that thing? It can erase, it can add, it can remove. That's the sort of spectacle that it was. By the time we left, there was no question in our mind that the way to go was to invest in technology. So right from when I then started what was then George Etomi & Co., I invested in that technology. There was also the IBM memory typewriter, which was a little better than the great Olivetti's and all the others. But I did tell one of my best secretaries at the time to go to all these computer schools, because we had them, App Tech and all these other places. Because once you were employed in the firm, the first thing we did was to send you for computer training. Because I made up my mind that if lawyers are going to take responsibility for the work that they do, then you must give them the instruments to do so. So,
fantastic, sir. I mean, wow, I've picked up a lot of things from this introduction. Mentorship is a big part of where you are, why you are where you are today. And I also picked up something else, which was a thread of friendship. Here you are. People may not know that you and Udoma were very good friends, and I presume still remain very good friends. And I would just like you to touch on how those kind of relationships help to foster corporate practice, in the future.
I'm glad you asked this kind of question, Dewey. I always tell our colleagues that even though we are competitors, we do not need to destroy each other for the sake of the overall benefit of practice. You must separate them. And that is why I have always, as you can recall, called for collaborations, for mergers, for whatever, anything it would take. Because the larger goal for me is the good of corporate law practice in Nigeria. And that's what I have been all through my life. It takes nothing off me to ask for collaborations. We did have those because the moment the second stage of the indigenization exercise took off, there was a lot more work in the market than the white lawyers to service them, because the response to the opening up the market was that there was a flurry of business inflow into the country, and everybody was looking for lawyers. So there were times we got work that was much more than we could take. And the quickest way to give the clients what they wanted was to have these collaborations on the job. So my advice to corporate law practitioners is that yes, we're competitors, but we must know that the client's interest is overriding. And if you're not highly specialized in an area, it behooves you to ensure that you farm out that particular aspect to somebody who can do it and work collaboratively with them. In the end, the client must always be king. You don't become any poorer in knowledge or in stature just because you do so. And I'm sure by the time we come to the story of the SBL, that was one of the propellants for setting up the SBL. And I'm so glad that message is seeping down the younger generation. Because in the end, we must protect and project the legal services market in Nigeria. Like I said, the competition is not necessarily here. With globalization, with advent of technology, your competitor is the Japanese lawyer you don't know, the Chinese lawyer you don't know, advising on different aspects of the same transaction. So why would you be tearing at each other here when the real big fish is out somewhere? Because if you don't do it, somebody else will do it. Nature was a vacuum.
Protect and project. I'm going to hold that in. And I think that we've actually probably have done a lot on the protection, because people talk about, when you talk about, law firms coming in, and everybody's always, the global law firms coming in, we're always very keen to talk about how we protect ourselves from that expansion, from that globalization. But the reality is that they're still coming in, right? But the projection side, I'd like you to just talk a little bit more about what we could be doing on the projection side as, corporate law practitioners, potentially as SBL as well.
Yeah. Now, let me step back a little bit. When I pushed for the establishment of the SBL, what I found out was that there was very little knowledge on the part of in-house counsel on the capabilities of their colleagues outside. When I look back now, when you look at some of the largest corporations, both indigenous and foreign corporations, the question, even within government, among government lawyers, you always had was that, oh, there are no Nigerian lawyers who can do this. I still remember when we were working for Nigeria Airways, and there was some huge transaction to do with the purchase of the last TC-10. And there was just this, even within Nigeria Airways, and even though we had been doing legal work for them, it was the message out there was that, oh, there are no Nigerian lawyers who could handle such complex transactions. So that impression needed to change. And which was why when one of the founding principles that drove the SBL was increased and intimate collaboration between practitioners outside and in-house counsel. And I think we've done phenomenally well, because when you know the in-house counsel, you understand the expectations. They too know you, and it breeds confidence in them, because especially for most of the in-house counsel of multinationals, they have to convince their bosses out there that there are competent hands in Nigeria that can handle their transaction. That was not an easy hurdle to scale. But you say they're still coming in. They will come in. The legal service market is growing larger and larger. The last time I checked, the global legal services market today is over $800 billion. It's projected in 2026 to exceed the $1 trillion mark. That moves in tandem with the expansion of the global economy. And with globalization and all the barriers to free flow of trade in goods and services being lowered, you should expect that competition. But what we must do is ensure that we get ourselves not just ready, but we must make the case that we can be reckoned with. And you know the story, even as we speak today, there's the UK-Nigeria trade negotiations going on.
Yes.
The UK is looking to boost trade with Nigeria. We need it at this particular time in our economy, but it's come with a condition: open up your legal services market. We're having those discussions now, but we cannot pretend that those discussions will not happen. But what you must do is negotiate yourself into a position that ensures that you don't go extinct. Instead, collaborations that will come out of this must strengthen existing law firms. And that's a journey we must all be in together. And if it's any good news to you, in Africa, we are one of the most respected legal markets in the entire Africa. And I know that there are, with the African Continental Free Trade area, there's going to be increased collaborations amongst African law firms.
Yes.
My good friend, Scott Cowan, who is working with Africa Legal, I think that's his singular mission.
Scott
and
is
so
on.
Scott is on, that's good. It's one of the things we should be doing. The charity begins at home. If you control your market, you will be dealt with on the basis of equality, and not because you are an appendage. So this is the direction I think we should be going.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I think one of the challenges we still want to address within the SBL is, you talk about the size of the legal market, the global size. If you go to the UK, they can identify what the size of their market is, what portion of the GDP the legal services market is. But we don't know what the size of our market is. Not just corporate lawyers, but the entire legal services market in Nigeria. Nobody has measured. And I remember clearly that UK legal market was it wasn't a small market, but it was a much smaller market. And there was a concerted effort by the Law Society to project the legal services market and that measurement of who they are and why they're important to the UK GDP, is now a consistent thing. And I'm hoping that we can put together a team to actually form, put some analysis together on the MBS and try to identify what we are worth and what we could be worth, I guess, in the African market, in Nigerian market and in Africa.
Absolutely correct. I know we've asked this question repeatedly in several of our conferences and other fora where we meet. What indeed is the size of the legal services market in Nigeria? Nobody knows. Is it $500 million? Is it $1 billion? Nobody knows. So at times you don't even know what you're fighting for.
Yeah.
And knowledge in this area is so important. Incidentally, this task is not going to be left to the SBL alone. It's going to be across the entire NBA.
Yes.
I think not just the SBL, SLP, SBL, everybody should now we should find out a mechanism for determining what the size is and how we can grow that size. Consistent and relentless interaction with government is important because they still remain the largest consumers of legal services. And sadly also, they still remain the largest skeptics about the ability of Nigerian law firms to deliver. The litigation lawyers don't have too much problems when it comes to that. It's the transactional lawyers.
Yes.
So there's still a lot of work left for us to do. Again, I give kudos to you for interacting actively now with the legislature. So with many amendments we require in laws to promote businesses, we're actively participating. We give support to them. And this must be consciously done. Increase collaborations even amongst ourselves, because at times we sell ourselves short, and that's something that's not nice at all in our profession. Firms undercutting each other. You know, it's almost like leaving the main deal and struggling for crumbs just because you want to survive. That's not going to. It doesn't have give you a long-term view of how you should be dealing with this market. Now, if you break down this global legal services market that I mentioned to you, about 800 billion, half of that is probably controlled by the US. A quarter of that, Europe, and the UK gets probably maybe 100 billion of that. So it means, the Asia Pacific countries get about 100 billion of that. So if you add up that, it means the rest of the world is being huddled into whatever that space is, and that's where Africa is. So what is that worth, and how can Nigeria grow that? So this is the challenge before us. We've started the ball rolling, and I think we must continue. SBL, I'm hoping that in the future, I know you have a lot of large international participation in your conference, but I think we should now consciously begin to get African law firms. Just find maybe one conference a year where everybody comes together, and we are basically comparing notes and working with each other, because we need support from each other. 2018, I was part of the International Bar Association Training Legal Services Committee to, I think, the Zambia, where we go do preparatory work for most of these regional groupings to help with globalization. And one of the things I heard there that shocked me was that by law, if the size of an arbitration is over £1 million or dollars, I forget, it must get a foreign law firm to handle it by law.
Wow.
Shocking.
That's ridiculous.
So, shocking, yeah. So, and you will wonder. So little wonder why we must understand that we must play a lead role in Africa, Nigerian firms, because we don't suffer those setbacks,
those restrictions.
Yeah, so we need and to pull the rest of the continent with us. But it comes at a price. We must invest in the profession. We must invest on equipment, or generally on knowledge acquisition, because there are no favors in this area. For your legislature legislature to support you, you must deliver the goods. So the SBL has its work cut out. What we now need to do is, how do we then keep pushing the needle? And don't forget what ultimate goal is to bring about prosperity to our members. Let's not forget where this whole conversation is leading.
Yes.
That's where it comes to. Let people see this profession as something worth investing in, because I can retire comfortably and know that I don't have any fears after I've worked so hard in my best years. Let's not forget where this conversation is going.
Yeah.
It's going the best good for the most number.
Thank you so much. I mean, you've already given us, I can identify at least 2 assignments that you've given us about determining the size of the market, focusing on African law firms. We're definitely going to take those on board, and I'm sure that there are more things that we'll be talking about. But now that we've gone to the SBL, for people that, I mean, I've heard the story, but I'd like you to share about how the SBL came about. What was the history, what was the thinking behind it, and what challenges have we faced, and what are the opportunities for us?
I'm glad you asked that question. I've always said in private conversations with you that one area where we need to do better than we're doing is documenting our history. And thankfully, I have documented the history of the SBL, and I think I gave copies to you. If some of the members require more copies, we can make that available. But from my perspective, what happened was I was in Port Harcourt at a dinner with OCJ Okocha when he was contesting to be president of the NBA. I think this was sometime in 1999, if I can recall the period. And even though I had been peripherally involved with the NBA activities, the NBA as it was presented at the time never had much room for those of us who are transactional lawyers. So I was not I was not enamored to what was going on at the time. So, and I mentioned to him that, look, I'll support you, but we need to create a section for business law practitioners. Because I think, I told him at the time that I didn't think the NBA was putting its best foot forward by ignoring a segment of its own whose contribution to the overall growth of the profession could not be measured at that time. And at that time, I thought about the transactional lawyers, I thought about in-house counsel. I mean, they had bits of stuff for them, fora in a corporate counsel fora, but that was not what I was talking about. It was to create in style similar to what the IB had, sections. And I always give him credit. He immediately bought the idea and pushed through a constitutional amendment that allowed for the creation of a section. So you can imagine what happened. The constitution had to be amended to allow, gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. But 2 years quickly ran by, and he had to hand over to Chief Wale Onanipeko. I still remember this was in Ibadan. And part of his handing over notes was that, please, we've gone so far, because he had set up a reform committee, which I headed at the time, to come up with the bylaws and all the other stuff. So Chief Wale Onanipeko took it on. He just brought a slight modification to that by saying, instead of creating just a section of business law, why don't we just go the full hug like the IBA does, and also a section legal practice? So he set up another committee, which then looked into that possibility. The only downside to that was that by the time the work was done and we're ready to go, his own term too had almost come to an end. So it was not until the last NEC meeting in Ilorin, which took place in Ilorin, of his 2-year term, that he finally inaugurated the SBL Council, and I was chairman, and then the section on legal practice, and Yusuf Ali, senior advocate, was made chairman. 3 months later, he handed over to Bayo Ojo, senior advocate. I always give Bayo Ojo one credit. I think he quickly understood the epoch-making nature of that move and said, look, George, this must be celebrated. This must be out there because it's a paradigm shift in the annals of the NBA. So it was he who then pushed for this wider presentation of both sections to the public. It was done then at the Lagoon restaurant, and that was the place to go to. And the print and electronic media were fully represented. And that was actually what brought the consciousness of the advent of these sections into the public domain. And he gave all the support. But sadly, he didn't give us money to start with. He gave us only, I still remember.
You can look after yourselves.
Yes, exactly. I still remember him. He gave us 1 million naira each and said, by the way, it's a loan. I said, Bayo, can't be serious. I said, can't be serious. Wow. But that was how we actually started. So at the time, but before then, I must confess, I cannot overlook the buy-in from the commercial law firms and corporate counsel, because I had a stakeholders meeting at the Federal Palace Hotel at the time, and I brought everybody together, the commercial law firms, corporate counsel, to discuss how this would run, because it was our business. I must confess, some of them at that time did express worry that, George, you know, the NBA is very political. Should we really be doing this under the NBA, or shouldn't we just sort of do our own thing? I said no, that even if you want to be an instrument of reform of the NBA, it is better to do it from within. And I really give them kudos that they accepted the argument. And I enjoyed the most cooperation from them. And I still thank every one of them. And every one of you, Deo, every one of you today, because I believe it was that spirit of cooperation that just sort of sipped through the entire fabric of the SBL that's still holding it together. And like I told you, I always tell them we're competitors, but it takes nothing away from any one of you to call the other out. So many of us are still best of friends outside the workplace, but we still compete when there are big briefs to grab. And I think that's the way it should be done. So with that on, unfortunately, Bayo just served only, I think, a year of his term before he was appointed Attorney General of Federation. And then Lanke Odogion completed his tenure. Now, the reason I'm taking the pains to mention each of these names is that every president that I worked with gave their fullest support. Every president that I worked with. And it's so important because after Lanke Odogion came Olisa Agbakuba. After Olisa came Chief Rotimi Akeredolu and all that. So and all through, because at the time we needed to make a statement. And if you go through our conferences till today, answer to the best international standards. And that was one thing that was singularly on my mind. I wanted people to walk into an SBL conference and not be able to distinguish whether they were an IBA conference, or Commonwealth Lawyers Conference, or any of those things that you saw. And if you go through the history, who's who were always here. And the moment the international legal community found out that Nigeria was getting its act together in the area of commercial law practice, they took an interest. And that's why you're seeing increased collaboration between foreign and Nigerian law firms. And I always, I never forget where I'm coming from. Anytime I have the opportunity, I thank all these presidents. But this is not to say the SBL did not eventually fall victim to the NBA politics. This is not to say so. I know that because as would naturally be, some minds in the NBA felt the SBL was a threat. Oh, remove George, take this away, bring this, emasculate them, and all that. Luckily, nobody bought too much into it, but we did come close to one time. And that's why if you go through your annals, 1 year, the conference didn't hold. It was one of those.
I think it was more than 1 year, because we're 20 next year. That's in 2024. And we will be holding this year is 17th annual conference. Next year, 18th annual conference.
Okay, no. Let me explain that.
Okay.
When the SBL was technically formed, the first 2 years we didn't hold any conference because we were just sort of getting ready. Yes.
Okay.
So it was in 2006 we held the first conference in Abuja, and up to 2010, the first 5 conferences under my watch were held in Abuja. And people at times wonder why. The truth was that because we were aspiring to international standards, it was only hotels in Abuja that could provide those facilities. Eco Convention Center wasn't ready then, and the old Eco Hotel couldn't have done it. But it then had a second unintended benefit, which was that Abuja, being central as it was, enabled lawyers from all parts to come in, because the SBL also had to answer to accusations that it was a Lagos-based thing. It was just for Lagos lawyers. And we said, no, take an interest. As you know, in the SBL is work. Anytime you find a volunteer in SBL, we say, please come.
Indeed, please, you're welcome.
Because SBL is the only section I know that you pay to serve. Those are not my words. Those are Ayuni Jemidi's words.
Ayuni always says that.
Yes, and all of and all of you chairmen, you know what you go through. Not only does your work suffer, your firm and everything, but because you are keyed in to in the minimum match what your predecessors have done, you don't count the cost. Yeah. And this is what for me is the beauty. And that's why any day I see you guys, I say thank you for keeping the fire burning, because it's very personal to me. Because if you start something and then it dies after a while, history will still record you as you started this good thing, but then history will also say it died. So for those of you who've kept the dream going, I just keep praying for you that we must push the needle for the sake of the younger generation. And I'm glad that we've caught quite a sizable number of them, because many of them who would ordinarily have not known about the myriads of areas of practice now know it. Yeah. And many of them, even when they were not honed into commercial law subjects in uni, when they come out, there's an opportunity. The continuing legal education, relentless continuing legal education program of the SBL teaches you as though you were starting afresh. And I think there are plans to actually create an institute for that. I hope Scott is still listening, because that's part of what we're planning to do. But this time we'll make it Africa-wide, because we must inherit the land. And we've done our part. The younger generation must take it up. And I'm seeing, council after council, the age bracket drops, yet the quality doesn't drop. That tells you a lot. It gives you a lot of hope.
I have to say that indeed, even when you look at what some young lawyers are doing outside of SBL, business lawyers, people are organizing on their own initiative, training for their colleagues. Last week, I attended one where they were talking about contract law provisions, and they hope to continue doing this random things. And I'm pleased with the spirit of what's going on with business lawyers. And you talk about the conference, and I think this is a good time to also introduce the fact that business law conference is holding this year. The 17th annual business law conference is holding the 5th to the 7th of July. So save the date. And we are going to be discussing the Nigerian business landscape, priorities for law, policy, and regulation. And I think this is a good time to segue into our discussion around the business law environment. So you are a leading business lawyer, but you are also, and actually that shouldn't be but, you are also a leader in the business community. We've just had elections last weekend. They've announced, the INEC has announced, the president-elect, etc. One of the things, my question for you is really, what should be the priority of this government in terms of the business landscape? How do we improve the business landscape one of the things you talked about was how business inflow led to a lot of work for you as a young lawyer. So without business inflow, obviously we're going to be in trouble. So how do we improve the environment for business inflow?
Again, I'm glad you asked this question, Deoye, because one of the most depressing things to me is our inability as a country to tie in our political, judicial, and even practice profile, the impact on businesses and the ability to attract businesses. It's only in Africa that I see that the political process, elections are like war. Something that's designed to provide a peaceful means to hand power from one regime to another becomes a tug of war, which is a great pity. And at times, the hurt arising from such wrong response to elections affect the business environment. Because what simply just happens is that a government that will require all hands on deck to push through difficult reforms may just have its efforts sabotaged all the way. Now, with the announcement of the winner, Asiwaju has his work cut out. And I think one of the first things he really needs to face very squarely is the damage subsidies are doing to the Nigerian economic landscape. And I know many of them in their campaigns talked about removal of subsidies. Well, campaign is one thing, getting it done is another. And to do that, you require help and understanding from everybody, winner, loser. And then when I mean loser, I don't mean loser in the sense of being hopeless, loser in just the factual that only one person has to win. But everybody in the end must come together. And I'm glad that in his inaugural speech, he has invited this collaboration. A lot of healing needs to take place because when you remove fuel subsidy, it will in the short to medium term bring about untold hardship. You must the legitimacy to appeal to Nigerians to believe in this journey and to come along with you. There's an issue of the power sector. I think we've always discussed that the major path to the diversification of this our economy is fixing power. Because we have relied for 60 years on one product, which has gotten us to where we are, oil and gas. Now, power provides it. Power too is being subsidized, is inefficient, but critically, anybody who understands the power sector, and I play in that sector today, will know that the fundamental problem in Nigeria is the inability to sustain the supply of gas for power. Because in all our planning, nobody created the infrastructure to move gas to power. The infrastructure exists to move gas for export as LNG, where it is lighting up foreign countries, but does not exist for us. What to do in that investment is humongous, but it also requires collaboration. And people must understand that 70% of your electricity cost is actually gas. That's what most people don't understand. And because this gas to power infrastructure does not exist today, we rely on gas producers to give us gas, which is, by the way, because it's subsidized, the price at which it's being given is dictated by government. So it's not attractive to the suppliers. So they supply gas today to the industry on what I term a best endeavor basis. It's not contractual. So the day they can give you, fine. The day they feel it should go somewhere else, it goes. And this is why you have this epidemic supply. For 2-3 weeks, you see.
And they're not encouraged because they're not paid.
Absolutely.
They're not paid.
Yeah, because it's subsidized. Because it's subsidized. Yeah. They're not being paid. It's subsidized, not being paid.
Yeah.
So,
I know companies that have tens of billions of naira outstanding.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's one thing the incoming administration must address. Those things will come at a price, and those prices will be sacrificed on the part of Nigerians. So this healing process must occur like yesterday. And I do not want the recriminations that come with "I won, you lost" kind of a thing. It's not going to cut it. It must be a message of peace, peace, and nothing but peace. Because we need that understanding. Because I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that a government that puts the Nigerian economy on track will give us the foundation for that prosperity which has eluded us up till today. So fixing the economy is going to be so crucial. Now, what about a word for our judiciary? And I'm sure you know that. The interference of the work of the judiciary by the executive branch has ensured that our law courts do not produce judgments that give you justice. And I'm not saying about bad judgments. I'm talking about judgments that are not delayed. Because even if a good judgment is delayed, it still carries injustice in it.
Yes.
How many transactions do we go for?
20 years to get a
20 years, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's good law. It comes to by that time the rest itself they have been destroyed. Some of the litigants would have died. How do you then compete? You are asking people to come and invest. And me and you know as transactional lawyers, the first question they ask you, what law governs XYZ? How do I get in? How do I get out? Look, recently, one of the young lawyers in my office went for a transaction. Everything occurring in Nigeria, with some foreigners involved. First, they said they wanted English law. You know, you are laughing. You know, we go through that all the time. Nigerian transaction. The governing law, they wanted English.
Both parties Nigerian.
Yeah. So the guy says, the lawyer says no, everything is in Nigerian law. Okay, they consider that point. Okay, place of arbitration. Oh, they said Singapore, and he said what? It's here, Lagos. He said no. Everybody knows that your judicial system is messed up, and that when matters go from arbitration to the court, they can die. So you can do all the good work at the arbitration level. Once it's appealed, all that gain is lost. And for somebody who is 5 years at the bar, hearing that, He came back to the office
exactly.
very depressed. Came back very depressed. And he's a young, and guess what? He didn't even end there. They even, when he then pushed hard, they said, okay, you know what? If you want it in Africa, it's got to be Rwanda or Accra. So we need to know the harm that we're doing to ourselves. We really need to know the harm that we're doing to ourselves. I mean, today, what cases do the courts give priority to? Political cases, number one. And those go from election cycle to election cycle. So they're endless. It's an endless stream. Pre-election cases, we are told, are over 600 in the Supreme Court alone, or in whatever stage it's supposed to go through. Then criminal cases, number two. And then the other civil cases, number three. So even to get a date, you have to go through this queue. And by the way, if you do not have a senior advocate involved, even to go and take a date, you know you are dead on arrival.
You're going to be in problems.
That system doesn't work for business. It doesn't work for business.
So judicial
reforms are going to be huge.
The Ministry of Justice, the Attorney General, has a significant reform work to do in this dispensation. Absolutely.
Look, let me tell you, we talk about PNID. PNID is because PNID is the most significant of all the damages that's been awarded against this country we're talking about. There's so many others. If you actually go and get a compendium of all the arbitral cases we've lost, if you go look into them, most have come from, well, apart from corruption underlying most of them, but most have come from incompetencies on the part of government agencies. They either simply don't respond to letters or sign agreements they don't understand or do stuff. So reforms are very critical because see, what underpins any democracy is the rule of law. Because if that's not guaranteed in a democracy, why? And what we're seeing today, sadly, the military regime respected the rule of law more than the civilians. It's sad. I mean, I've been around long enough to know this. We never had the judiciary tampered with under the military. The military actually essentially left the judiciary alone, as long as you don't come into that territory. They left them alone. Standards were still kept. Those who should be promoted got promoted. But the judiciary today has been infiltrated by politicians. Today, some of them boast about how much they invest in setting up panels. It's sad, but I'm an incurable optimist. When you know the problem is 50% of the solution. So this incoming government has its work cut out.
Yep.
Thrown the rule of law because it's a veritable instrument to attract investments. And we need investments like no man's business to shore up this economy.
And thrown the rule of law. I mean, that's, thank you so much. That is essential, that is critical. I think that I would say that whenever whoever is nominated as Attorney General, I think unlike what we've done in the past, please nominate your candidates for the position that they're going to take. And let us hear from the candidates about what they want to do. And in particular, I'll be looking to hear from the Attorney General nominee about his or her views about the reforms that are necessary to move the rule of law, to engender the rule of law in Nigeria. So thank you very much, sir. I mean, we are fast running out of time. We've got really 2 minutes left, and we try to close. But time flies when you're having fun. There are lots of questions that have been asked here. I'm just going to, one directly at you is your opinion on the effects of Nigeria's tax regime on the Nigerian business environment.
Okay.
And then the second one I
right.
can deal with that very quickly is that, they had a Nigerian law Someone says he or she attended an event at the Nigerian Law School, Lagos 2004, that was tagged as an SBL event. Wouldn't that count as your first conference? So this is somebody talking from history. This other question is addressed to the SBL, so I'll deal with that one. So if you can just answer those two.
All right, quick. Tax laws. Yeah, I think we all agree that one of the major things we require in this country is an overhaul of our tax laws. The tax laws are not working efficiently. They're arbitrary, and they deter businesses. And I'm not even looking at the big businesses. I'm looking at the small to medium size businesses, because the myriads of taxes they have to pay and the people who come harass you to shut down your place because you're not paying, it's a huge, huge deterrent. So we need comprehensive tax reform of tax laws, to enable those laws work to promote businesses. Today, we give tax holidays to businesses that don't deserve to be given tax holidays. And then we punish those. In fact, in Nigeria, you punish those who show up to pay taxes. So instead of widening the tax bracket, you keep hitting, somebody pays 8,000 naira today, the following year it's 1.5, next is 2, it's arbitrary, nobody knows, only because he showed up.
We've got to get you. You showed up. That means you can't.
Yeah. It's like we've got you, and that sort of thing. So yes, the issue of tax laws must work for business. The reforms need to be done. SBL 2004, the distinction here was that within the NBA at that time, I told you that when they were flirting with the idea of section, whatever. So they had an NBA conference, or an NBA conference. And then they just tagged whatever, SBL. So that was what happened. Yeah. That was what happened. The section on business law had not been formally inaugurated, which was done, as I told you, pursuant to the reforms that took place. And I became the first chairman, and our first conference, as I told you, was in 2006 in Abuja.
Thank you so much, sir. There's a last question about the Business Facilitation Act. Yes, once it is gazetted, we will have a copy, and we will sit down with PEBEC and the PEBEC team and other people who in the SBL, because the SBL was instrumental to it, but members of SBL who were part of that process will sit down and we'll be talking about the Business Facilitation Act. So thank you so much, Mr. Etomi. This was a wonderful session. I think truly we can go on for another hour, so I don't think that we feel the impact. And, all the comments from the chats, lots of people here saying that they've enjoyed the seminar. I certainly have. I've taken a lot of lessons. And even since we're talking about priorities for law, policy, and regulation in the next conference, we've noted subsidy, we've noted the power sector, we've noted the judiciary, and we've noted judiciary and enthronement of the rule of law. And we've also noted this issue around tax law. And these are some of the sessions that we are going to be discussing. So thank you so much for that. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating through your questions, through the chat. They certainly encouraged me when, just hearing some of your comments. So thank you very much. Let me say that the SBL is making every effort to make ourselves available to you. Our focus is on your prosperity, as Mr. Etomi kindly mentioned earlier. We're focused on making sure that we impact your lives and that we influence the business environment within which you work. We've had a bit of a challenge with our payment portals, but that has been fixed now. And you will be receiving a message that would pass on information about how you can pay your SBL membership dues. That encourages us to do these things that we have been doing. So if we've been talking about building an institution, that's what we're doing, and it is your dues that helps us to build that institution. So you will receive a message that gives you more details about this. Please enroll, join, tell all your members, all your friends that are interested in business law to enroll, and join us in our weekly business law sessions. And given that there's been so much, we have enjoyed this, we expect to do these kind of sessions. People like Mr. George Etomi, previous chairs of the SBL, will be doing these kind of sessions with them as part of the Business Law Weekly series. This is in addition to our various committee discussions. So thank you very much again, Mr. Etomi. Thank you to you, kind members, for staying on. This brings us to the end of this session today, and we look forward to chatting with you next week as well. So thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.